happy Wednesday evening, everyone. Hope you had a great day today. Was just looking at my picture, and I have to agree with AnchorCon. Uh, put that outfit on me that I was wearing, and then put on that steampunk hat and a few of that gear, and I would probably look like a pirate Tom Petty. I have to say that would be pretty cool. Except I still don't think I would do any karaoke. I'd have tomatoes thrown at me for that itself.
Well, you never know until you try.
This is true, but we would like to welcome Tom Rasch here today. He is a fabulous artist. He was next to us at Black Hills Con, and have to say that was a wonderful show itself. And we are happy to say that we will probably be going back next year. So,
Well, first of all, I'll say hello, everyone. And yeah, it was really, really nice to have you as a neighbor. I enjoy kind of those moments, like when you have people next to you, you sort of get the whole weekend to really get to know each other. And once again, you form a new connection for sure. So,
definitely. And I have to say, you had some wonderful art there. And you do quite a bit of stuff.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Let's talk about some of the stuff that you did, because I know one of the big things, at least for me, and I know my family were big Star Trek fans. So I know you did a model for, was it a model? I'm trying to think. This is, my brain hurts half the time. One of the ships that you drew.
Well, first of all, I'll say I'm probably one of the biggest Star Trek fans on the planet. I think I had an Enterprise there, which I was what I've been trying to do is I'm always trying to kind of switch up my approach for presentation at cons, and I like to bring my nerd cred with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I had the ship, but there was no room on the table, so I had to kind of set that with the stuff that I have below. But yeah, I mean, lifelong Trekkie nerd. It's not hyperbole to say that Star Trek, I mentioned that I think at one of our closing or opening ceremonies, closing one, that Star Trek and the things that I'm into quite literally have saved my life. They gave me escapism, entertainment, of course, but also inspiration and a path, really, when it comes to what I've wanted to do, what I currently do. And I can't thank comic books and art and my mom's art, who was my first inspiration. Everything that I've been into since childhood and still am, to sort of just give me a nice path that I think is, as Bruce Lee would say, honestly expressing myself.
Mm-hmm. Now, the other thing is that if I recall, you had a Kickstarter that just started. Let's tell people a little bit about that Kickstarter.
Well, it didn't start. It started 2 years ago. And I've been resharing it on Facebook just to remind people that it was a success, because we have a second one coming up. And I'll admit it's because of me. I'm running a little bit behind. I have to finish up the narration to give to Jack so he can do the final edit on the video before we get it approved. But we're still hoping to launch here in the near future, and it would be to fund issue 3. Well, let me back up here a little bit. So the Kickstarter is for Black Alpha, which is my 5th grade creation. It was featured in USA Today. I've had merchandise from it on The Big Bang Theory. It's been optioned a few times for TV and film development. And it's been out in the public eye for about 10 years. And I actually first, when I was still living in Denver, I did one of a Denver con there that I kind of took the plunge to get it out in the public eye, because there's a bit of a risk. You never know how people are going to respond to something they've never heard of. And so I had some things created back then to get attention when people would walk by my table. And I had like these maquettes, which are statues of the character, modeled by my friend Matt Taylor, who worked for Blizzard for years. He worked on a number of games, including Overwatch. And I had a few other things, posters, T-shirts, to sort of just get notice on, get eyes on. And so, and I've been doing that ever since. Like I sort of used my pedigree of, I drew for Marvel at one time, and I've done stuff for video game companies and projects for the PlayStation Network, that I sort of give my pedigree so I can tell people this is what I have done. And then this is what I'm currently doing. And I'm sort of circling back to the 5 or 7-year-old or 11-year-old me that's living my creative bliss of like bringing my own characters and universes to life. So anyway, so but yeah, like I said, Black Alpha was in USA Today, and the pitch of it is, what if you took the Batman story, you sprinkled in Iron Man tech, and you dropped it off in the middle of Star Wars? And I repeatedly said in a number of interviews that because I grew up loving television, and my first memories of television were Batman, Spider-Man, Star Trek, right around the same time. You know, my parents got me a little Batmobile, like kind of a scooter thing. I would scoot myself on and would do the classic, you know, making a mask for me and tying a towel around my neck, and I was supposed to be Robin. Um, and Spider-Man, my mom said I would take like one of those ski masks or something and put it on my hair, my head, and act like I was climbing on the walls. And I was about 3 or 4. So with that being said, I think because as I was instantly hooked without probably even fully realizing what I was enjoying on television, that both of those were the components of science fiction and superhero mythology. And so my first creation, Black Alpha, which I created as an 11-year-old in 5th grade, is kind of really born of those two worlds. So it's probably the most pure, I guess, extension of those interests, you know. And so, and I don't know if it's, I'm not sure if it's a blessing or curse, but I have had a pretty fertile imagination. And when I started drawing and drawing more, like I said, I was inspired by my mother initially, my mother Maggie. I continued to enjoy drawing, and it would always be, you know, cars getting in wrecks and fire trucks would be coming with their sirens on to, you know, there's like fire all over the place and cars are tipped over. And I had those kind of scenes, that kind of sort of fun little young mind chaos. But I also would draw the Enterprise. I would draw the Batmobile. I would draw Spider-Man. And so as I got to be a little bit older, and then when I first discovered those television shows, my dad, Bob, was stationed over in Guam. So I first saw those over there. When our family came back to the United States, my mom actually bought me a Batman comic, probably around maybe 1st grade. And so that was when it was like the weird reverse for some people. Like I discovered television first before I discovered comics. And then after that, my uncles, who were teenagers at the time, I was about 7, they introduced me to a vast collection of Marvel comics from DC and Marvel. I'd never heard of any of these characters, and that really, really expanded my world. And so 2 things happened then, is they introduced me to Bruce Lee, and they introduced me to the wonderful world of comic books. And as time progressed, I just continued doodling characters. And then when I was, like I said, in 5th grade, I decided I wanted to create my own character, and I wanted him to be a space hero with a really cool spaceship. And the name was kind of what I came up with. And I think that probably without realizing it, Black Alpha probably sounded like Black Adam. I also watched the Space 1999 TV show, Moonbase Alpha. You know, so those similar sounding, or the names I just probably took from that, you know, subconsciously. And I only semi-jokingly say I've been uncomfortable with that name for years, but I couldn't find anything better. So it's always been that since I was 11, and I've never changed it. So
I have to say, you definitely started early. That's actually one of the questions I always ask, is what got you inspired and what age? And you just nailed both those questions in one shot.
Well, probably because I've done podcasts for years, so I sort of become prepared. But it's probably just a reminder to me about, like, you know, when you're trying to find your place in this world, and some people, you know, they have to find a number of moments to sort of really define who they are. I was fortunate that, well, I wanted to be a starship captain, first of all, so I'm still waiting on that one. But everything else that I wanted to do, like I wanted to be a rock star. I wanted to write and direct films. I wanted to draw comic books. It was always about, like I said, honest creative expression. And the blessing and the curse part is that I've talked to people who, when they find out what I've done and what I want to do, they'll say, oh yeah, I used to create my own characters and I was a young kid, but I sort of lost interest in that, or I drew and then I lost interest in that. Well, that never left me all these years. I know that, you know, I've actually connected with some of my friends from grade school in the last several years on Facebook. And I think the one thing they remember me, even from me being in grade school years, was I was always the artist in the class. And I was extremely shy back then, you know, so they're probably surprised to see how I am now as an adult. But back then I was your classic shy art nerd. Most of my time was spent just digesting comics and movies and TV shows that I loved. And I didn't get out and do a lot of stuff. I mean, I come from a family of 10, and ironically, you can come from a large family and still feel kind of lonely, sort of trying to find your niche in life. And so I spent a lot of time also in my parents' backyard, playing with my Star Trek and DC and Marvel superheroes, Planet of the Apes action figures, and crafting stories for them. I'd always have storylines in my parents' backyard. And so I feel like that was the beginning of the journey, I guess, to where I'm at now. It's the same kind of thing, except that the characters are my own.
And I have to say, it's bringing back a flash of memories. It's like Planet of the Apes. I remember watching that. Batman, of course. Star Trek. It's like, I think for me, the biggest one that I always enjoyed watching back then was Speed Racer.
That was my first introduction to anime, really.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I mean, there's just so much back then. And I don't want to say good or bad, but I think there was more to it back then for us than it is today. I think today it's just, I don't want to say, I won't say it because I'll get in trouble if I say it.
Well, I think when you're of a certain generation, you have a very interesting vantage point to where there was the before years and the after years, at least how I term them as, which is, pop culture has become such a huge part globally because of the different platforms that have sprung up. Technology has also helped that, right? I mean, a lot more kids are introduced because of the technology in the films, have made the Marvel universe this huge juggernaut, because the technology didn't exist when I was a kid. You know what I mean? Like they had a Spider-Man TV show and a Hulk TV show with Lou Ferrigno. The technology was so limited that there was still a bit more that more cult or niche market. But because of technology now, these amazing superhero movies have popped up left and right because the technology can sort of bring those stories to life and do them justice. But also, stuff like video games and the connectivity of people being able to be connected on the internet. So I feel like all of that has spread like wildfire. But I remember a time when, because of limited and how we communicate and how we connect to people, like, with the exception of maybe one or two friends growing up, I thought I was the only person that was into Star Trek. I was the only person that was into comic books. And so it's been very interesting to watch everything, including even stuff like anime, become what it's become in the current market. And just it's interesting. I mean, I embrace it. I'm not one of those people that get angry that the rest of the world caught on, but it's just interesting to just sort of feel like, that how the stuff we always knew was cool is cool to a lot more people now. And when I do these cons, I'm very impressed by the amount of young people and also boys and girls sort of together now really enjoy this stuff. Back when I was younger, it was generally known more as a male dominated young market.
True. We do have a question for you.
Okay.
Do you feel a certain way when cinema changes a superhero backstory to say fit in a 2-hour movie?
No, I mean, I'm one of those passionate fans that learned early on to embrace iteration. And so like when I see like a film version of something, whether it's a comic or even an old TV show I grew up with, I embrace that as its own thing, and I feel like the storytelling components are different, when like from a novel, a lot of people complain about when they have read a famous novel or they're a fan of a book series and they go see the film, there's so many changes. And I feel like because the dynamics that are in place have to be shifted somewhat, to fit into that 2-hour time frame for a film. Just like, if you're going to do a certain story, some things are more tailor-made for like the long form series, whether it's streaming or a mini series, to allow more of that breathing room for the story to unfold. But, like as a Trekkie, I mean, I grew up on the original series. That's still my favorite. I like the other, Next Generation, the stuff that followed the films are their own thing. And even the the Kelvinverse is its own thing. So for me, it doesn't bother me, I guess. Like the only time that I've ever, this is kind of maybe on and off topic. The only time that I've ever gotten angry seeing something brought to life on the silver screen is that the original Michael Keaton Batman from 1989 is that one scene where the bat wing flies up in front of the moon to create the bat symbol and then sort of drops back down. That was the only time I ever got angry in a comic book movie because I felt like that really broke the fourth wall. It was just like a total visual gag. And it took me out of the movie for a moment. That tends to be the only time that I'm upset. And then, like I said, if there's things like modern takes on something and I don't care for it, I can always go back to the original. I mean, we all can own the originals of anything, or go back and read the comics that we enjoy. So
I have to say, going back to what you were saying about technology and the difference, because I think one of the biggest things for us, at least I want to say early 80s, maybe late 70s, I think it was Knight Rider, the A Team, and Airwolf.
mhm.
And I think those were the biggest shows back then with the technology, with the explosions and everything. And there wasn't really that much technology to it. It was just mainly explosions.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the one thing I can say that for me, I won't necessarily say it's a negative, but when it comes to modern technology, because we have all these tools now at our disposal, sometimes I feel like storytelling suffers a little bit because the people, it's like, like a kid getting this whole room full of new toys and you want to sort of use all of them. That I feel like it does create a bit of a hindrance now for modern storytelling because then you have all this big budget to do all the explosions and the huge battles and the sky beam and that sometimes I think the storytelling suffers because I will say, getting back to the stuff that I grew up with, like Star Trek and Star Wars, because of the limited budget, they were able to really, really craft the stories to really rely on, I guess, kind of filling in the theater of the mind of the audience to give exposition so that the audience didn't have to see these bigger epic components of that universe. They were to kind of fill in the blanks with their mind. And I'm still, by the way, I'm still a big believer in exposition as a way to kind of leave a little bit of mystery, but also let your audience know there's a bigger universe out there if you so choose to kind of, I guess, dwell on it and kind of do your version in your head. So,
Well, I have to ask them, what's your opinion with the CGI, with their special effects and also making people younger or bringing them back to life after they've passed away?
yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be a difficult topic to explore.
Mm-hmm.
Just because there's an element of, I mean, they did that with Peter Cushing in Rogue One, as Grand Moff Tarkin. And
Mm-hmm.
It could go both ways. I mean, like if you think about celebrities who've passed away, like, could you go back and redo a Crow movie with Brandon Lee or Bruce Lee? Tomorrow, by the way, is the 50th anniversary of Bruce Lee's passing, which I plan on making a post about. But I mean, any famous Marilyn Monroe, Elvis Presley, anyone who's this world global icon, and you bring them back to life, are you disrespecting their memory? Some people feel like you're honoring it because you're sort of in a way breathing life into their spirit and bringing them back, but it's not really them. So I feel like CGI, like in many things, if it's got to be explored, I think, correctly. And sometimes there's the temptation of going to the dark side where you can overstep a line for sure if you're not careful. So
That I definitely agree with. There is a fine line, and it's it's black and white right there. There's no gray. Now, with all the drawing that you've been doing, what conventions are you planning on going to in the near future?
well, I'm still here in the Black Hills area, so we have another one called the Dakota. I always get it switched around. Mini Nerd Dakota, something like that, and that one is this Friday and Saturday. I will list if anyone. By the way, if anyone wants to come and check out what I do, you can find me on Facebook under Tom, TOM, and then RASCH, and I tend to share a lot of what I'm doing weekly and daily on there. I have that con coming up, and there's a new one started by my friend Cherise that is going to be in October. I think it's Fan Fest. I'll have to remember the full title of it. I actually have an agent that I sign with. I think we talked about her, Ginger,
Mm-hmm.
with Magpie. And I
No
told her, I
doubt
teased her, I
about
feel like
that.
I'm a bad client because like she's had a few shows she could get me to Dubai twice now. One was in California. And because of my commitments with work and being a father to a 5-year-old daughter, it's hard for me to justify leaving. So for now, I tend to do the local cons, especially during the summertime, because my schedule is a little more organic. And so therefore I can take the time off if necessary for an extra day or so to do those. But, that's the plan for now. I mean, I hope to at some point being able to open up and go to some of the other cons. And I haven't been to San Diego Comic-Con in about, 15, 16 years. And I started going to that one in the summer of '89. And I will say, because this was actually brought up to a friend recently, I have a friend, John Proudstar, that's on the show, or Reservation Dogs, which is on FX Hulu. And he got to do San Diego last year. And we were talking about like it can be a catch-22 because you're going to these huge cons that everyone's talking about. But if you're trying to get eyes on what you're doing, there's a lot of more white noise to go through. And so I'm not knocking the bigger cons. I'm just saying for me, what I like about these smaller ones, like here locally, is that I feel like it's a much more intimate experience, where I think that everyone is a little more supportive of each other, and you're not having to fight, left and right just to get attention on why you're there, so.
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit before the show started. The smaller cons definitely have a little bit more of a family appeal to them, I think.
Oh, for sure.
And the bigger ones, it's just like you said, so much white noise, all the static around. You always looking around, you're gonna miss something. And the smaller ones, you have more time to actually spend with the artists, the guests, the vendors, and you can also learn about them. You have time to ask questions. You're able to communicate more.
For sure.
Like I said, Black Hills, I loved it up there. I can't wait to go back, as I've said before. I don't know, there's so many, I guess, down here. It's like I said, there's between 30 or 40 in Houston this year, and it's just so overwhelming. Which ones do you go to? Which ones do you not go to? Is there a certain guest that you want to meet at one of these shows? It's just, like I said, it's mind-boggling.
One fun aspect for me that I mentioned about having a 5-year-old, though, is that Black Hills Con was that was her third Black Hills Con, and probably her fourth one. She'll be at the one I'm doing here in a couple days. She loves it, and I'm so glad I can share that with her. I mean, she was 2 or 3 when she did her first one, and I think I can only imagine what that's like for her to see all these people walking around. In fact, Jade Jobs, who does the Dakota Mini Nerd Con, her and her boyfriend Mason, who I've become very good friends with, they were dressed up as Batman. I think he was from Batman Beyond, perhaps, and she was, Harley Quinn. And sorry, excuse me. She was so excited to get her picture taken with them. In her eyes, like anything else, she loves the Disney princesses. And her young mind, then it's like she's met the actual characters. And so I love being able to kind of pass the torch to her, that sort of sense of wonderment of what this pop culture experience is all about. And so I'm glad that I can, like I said, pass it on to her. And she seems to really enjoy it. She loves getting dressed up. She said she's already a cosplayer. So she loves wearing her different outfits, and then when she gets a little bit older, my goal is, I hope if she wants to, maybe she can help Dad out at my table. She can help me, kind of with presentation or help me with sales or whatever. I just want to continue to be able to share that bonding with her because I know for me, this subject has been brought up on occasion. I have some friends that are into all the things that we talk about, and they'll be like, oh yeah, my parents were not interested in Star Trek or anything for that matter. But I was fortunate. My mom and dad, that's the reason I even started watching Star Trek, was that my parents watched it. And they were kind of into nerd stuff. I remember one time being very young and they watched Forbidden Planet. And I watched that with them. And so, but Star Trek was like family viewing with my parents and anything else for that matter. So they definitely kind of started it for me. And then I'm trying to continue it with my own daughter, just how much fun pop culture stuff can really bring into someone's life.
Now, I will say that would be pretty cool. And then have her as a cosplayer at your table. I mean, she can enter contests, and you never know what could happen with any of that.
Well, ironically, her mother, who worked with me 10 years ago at that Sodak Con that was here, that's kind of what she was. She was my booth babe, and she actually dressed in the colors. She kind of looked like a comic book character of my Black Alpha character. So yeah, we're kind of like her mother sort of passing the baton to her too, if she wanted to do that, at my table. So.
Oh, sweet. I have to say, it's been a while since what has it been, 3 weeks now? 4 weeks?
Yeah, roughly. We're getting pretty close to a month out.
And I know I had back-to-back shows, and I think getting prepped up for another one in mid-August. And then, of course, you have one this weekend. I mean, there's shows all around, and I know it's not just Houston. I know San Antonio, Dallas. Uh, when is Dragon Con? I know Atlanta's fixing to have Dragon Con. San Diego, of course,
Usually in
San
the
Diego.
fall. Dragon Con's usually in the fall sometime. I don't know if it's like September, October, I believe.
I think September because New York Comic Con's in October.
Okay, yeah.
So, I mean, there's going to be a lot going on, and you can go just about anywhere. I know Lake Charles has SciFiCon. I know they have GeekCon coming up in Shreveport, and Anime Oklahoma, I think, is in September. Brazoria County Comic Con, which is in September, the following after Anime Oklahoma. I mean, it's everywhere. So, I mean, definitely, people, if you are interested in Comic Cons or anime conventions, you have a ton of places to choose from.
That
And,
actually reminds me, sorry to interrupt,
no,
one of the big things that we have coming up on top with getting the Kickstarter for the next Black Alpha is that we have our first officially licensed product. I'm having a model kit of the hero ship for my story. So also loving, Star Trek and Star Wars. I was also immediately drawn into the world of spaceship models, and my dad would build them for me when I was very young, and they were all Star Trek. And so next month we will have our first model kit of the Aramis 7, which is Black Alpha's version of the Enterprise or the Millennium Falcon. Or I describe it as it's the Batmobile and the Batcave in space because it's his hot ride and his base of operations. But the guy, Jonathan Marshall of Marshall Models, he debuted a prototype of that in June, actually, at the Wonderfest, which is the biggest hobbyist science fiction, and it was cool. So my model was out there, and my brother lives in that area, so he got to hold the model kit. So my ship was making its own appearance at another kind of con, where it's more, like I said, it's for the hobbyists that do like sculptures and maquettes, and there's some really amazing, very gifted hobbyists that create movie style replicas of anything from any movie you've seen, characters, it doesn't matter. So that was really fun to sort of have my ship out there kind of representing me and stuff like that. And so that's also been really cool that I have a number of people that are interested in buying the model kit. And I do have to do a nerd shout out that I've become good Facebook friends with Chris Hunter, who's the son of Jeffrey Hunter, who played Captain Pike in the original Star Trek Pilot the Cage. And then, the character is on Star Trek Strange New Worlds right now. But he's been saying for years he wants a copy of the model kit. So I sort of joke around. I'm like, that's a pinch me moment as a fan, because I'm like, that's Star Trek royalty. He's the son of the original Star Trek captain before Kirk. He heard about the script before one single frame was even shot. Like he said, he's the original Trekkie. So he's been very supportive. And I have friends who work at Disney that have been with Disney for 30 years, being supportive of what I'm attempting to do. And I appreciate their support, because it does kind of show you that your instincts are correct. Because sometimes I think when you're trying to get original material out there, you sort of worry that you're creating in a bubble, and maybe your stuff isn't as good as you hope it is. So, but anyway, so that's one for me personally. The grade schooler in me is also doing backflips about having a model kit of my ship. So I'm very excited about that, and I'll share on Facebook, by the way, when those are available in August.
don't do too many backflips. Might throw my back out.
Yeah. I better be careful saying that term. Yeah, I've been lucky so far by not having any back or hip or knee problems. So
Now that brings up a question that we don't ask too much, but like you said, did you ever get discouraged with all the doubts, and what kept you driving forward?
That's been going on since grade school. It currently still happens. I think it's human. It's a human emotion to be deflated, especially in this world where you're trying to kind of forge an unknown path of dreams, which is wrought with a lot of, things maybe, and there's people that each one has their own path. Of some people find instant success, or the old overnight success sometimes takes 10 or 20 years. I have to remind myself of that because I've had a number of disappointments. Like I said, Black Elf has been optioned a few times for TV movie development. There's been no traction yet. I had another Second time, another one of my characters called Sam Tusk was been in development now for half a decade as an indie action film. He's kind of a black steampunk Indiana Jones. That kind of fell apart again in the fall. And so I had to go through a lot of self-reflection, or, in the fall going into winter, and kind of basically taking a little time off to regroup and lick my wounds and say, I could try and sort of put this on the shelf maybe forever, but then I'm not being honest with me. I mean, like whether or not there's that material success that I think we sort of strive for, but that can take on many layers and many definitions. For me, I'm learning that I'm being honest with my true creative spirit by always forging forward, even if there are disappointments. So anything that I've done, like it took me a while to get my foot in the door in the video game industry. It took me a while to get my foot in the door with comics, drawing for Marvel. Everything that I do is always going to have an aspect to that. But I feel like for my daughter, especially, one of the legacies I want to leave behind for her, besides being a good father and a good loving father, is to remind her that everyone should expect the best. Sometimes you're going to have to work hard for that, though. And that includes there'll be disappointments, and you just have to continue to, we all live our own hero's journey. I'm a big proponent of that. The old saying of like slaying your dragons, the difficulties you face in life. I mean, I think that's fantasy metaphor or allegory for we have to always pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, as the old saying, get back on that horse. And I've done that repeatedly. And I anticipate as I get older now, the pep talk that I gave myself this past year is I will continue to do that. Don't take anything for granted, and also learn to pick your battles and also recognize certain milestones. Maybe, like for me, the fact that we had a successful Kickstarter, that's a milestone. The fact that Black Alpha was published in USA Today, milestone. Had merchandise on the Big Bang Theory. Those are big milestones. I don't have a TV show or movie yet, but I have to, and we have a model kit, of the ship, another milestone. And the fact that I have 7 characters that I tend to have out in the public eye, especially on Facebook. Every single one of those has had interest from Hollywood. That's 7 characters, all with separate stories. So those still are milestones for me that do kind of sort of help, I guess, feed the need to continue going forward. And you can't really imagine anything else. Like I said, if I've been at this long, since grade school, there's no stopping it now. I mean, regardless of how deflating it can be at times. So
I definitely agree with that, because being an author, you can get hit with bad reviews, you can get hit with, but just keep going. I mean, there's always going to be somebody that doesn't like something. You can't please everybody. That's another thing. You definitely can't please everybody.
Well, and I can say this, that it's been, there's a lot of lessons in life, and I'm a cheerleader of self-education. You should never stagnate, never peak, no matter what age you are. And the lesson that I've learned, especially because of being kind of seduced by the dark side of Hollywood, with like 3 different entities wanting to turn my stuff into a movie or TV show, comics are still a wonderful medium to tell stories. And I've kind of had to circle back around to re-embracing that, as I'm very fortunate that in the last 10 years that people are still interested in what I'm doing. And so that's why I feel like I owe it to my daughter, me, and the audience especially, to finish this Black Alpha miniseries. It's 4 issues. The 4 issues will be wrapped up almost like a film. I treat the idea that I've had in mind for this particular IP is that I want to treat it like each miniseries is its own book, like a novel, or its own film. And it will wrap up with, like a coda at the end. That'll be somewhat of a finale, and we'll leave things open in case we want to explore more. But for me, issue 1 to issue 4 has been 10 years in the making. And like I said, I'm appreciative that the previous Kickstarter was a success, that people were very supportive. And that allows me to kind of be in a position to finish the story that I've been wanting to tell for literally decades now. So that's also a milestone. That's a win, and so I've had to learn to not minimize the wonderful medium of comic books, because, and I know a lot of people out there in this world, like you sort of get excited and seduced by, oh, my thing is going to be a TV show or cartoon or whatever. Awesome. But, let's re-embrace that comics are still a wonderful storytelling component. And so that's been a good sort of a relearn lesson for me, to go back to like a comic is still a medium. And once again, I'm just grateful anyone even wants to read about my characters in my universe.
Now, the one thing I have to ask, because we do know that you are definitely the artist, but are you also the writer, author of Black Alpha?
No, I learned to stay in my lane, and I know that I'm not a natural born writer. So I actually work with writers. I've been very fortunate to connect with writers on Facebook, screenwriters, writers who write my comics. Showrunner would not be the exact title, but I know that, see, I design the world, I design the universe, I come up with the characters, I come up with the stories, the general plot outlines, and I know the direction and the tone of the stories that I want to tell. But what I love about working with writers is that they give my characters a voice. And in that aspect, I've said it before, I sort of get to be an audience member. Like even though I pictured my character all these years, when a writer really gives them some interesting dialogue or even does things I hadn't considered, I sort of get to be there going, oh, wow. Like it's sort of brand new. It's a very interesting, surreal, I guess, synergistic, connection with the writers. So yeah, I've been very fortunate that, in fact, I love when I work with writers and I get to see them delivering a script of my characters and my story, because it does bring it to a whole other level of development, So yeah, I wish I was a writer. I've seen too many movies and too many TV shows, and I read too many comics. And so my writing is just rich with cliche. And so that's why I've learned to kind of step out of the way and let the writers do their thing. And a lot of times they do, like I said, they bring it to a whole other level.
Yeah, it's definitely hard being a writer and coming up with the new stories. I will say that, because I've seen, like you said, I've seen so many movies and read so many books. It's just like, where do you keep the difference? And it's very, very hard to do sometimes. But you just have to make up your own. And to do that, you really have to dig in deep.
Well, and I feel like, I don't begrudge anyone who was their dream to grow up. If they wanted to work for Marvel or DC and they wanted to tell their favorite X-Men story or Spider-Man, I mean, I have my top 5 list. If I had more time in a different life and somebody gave me the license, I would do a Star Trek story. I would do a Star Wars story, but then I would also do more like vague IP. Like I'm a huge fan of the Derek Flint movies that starred James Coburn. To me, he was way better than James Bond. I would do one of those if I could. There's some other stuff that I have interest in, but ultimately, there's never been a more creative zing for me than actually watching my characters. And you feel like a parent, like you're giving birth and life to these characters, and you're watching them grow and you're nurturing them. And so that will always be number one for me. But the one thing that I hope, and I tell people constantly, I wear my influences on my sleeve. The stories that I have for my characters is I want every single one of them to have a relatability factor, kind of the Peter Parker aspect. It's your next door neighbor. Because even though I pitch Black Alpha as, Batman and Iron Man meets Star Wars, ultimately the lead character is named Trandon Antares. He's a very much, some of it's my story of me being a young boy, but also some of it's Peter Parker's story. He's a young guy from the wrong side of the tracks, grows up in poverty, is given this opportunity, and because he's immature at the beginning, he doesn't use these gifts to become an automatic hero. He makes some mistakes. And so that's another template. The connective tissue is there. I'm curious, which are you most proud of? Do you pronounce that Mombi? I've seen the Mombirella.
Mombirella, like a zombie mom.
Okay. Almost kind of sounds like Barbarella too, a little bit. So which am I most proud of? Well, first and foremost, I'm most proud of my daughter. I have an amazing daughter. So obviously as a dad, that's going to be always first and foremost. Beyond that, I guess I'm just proud of the fact that I've never let my passion for what I want to do lead me. And trust me, it can be tempting. I mean, I talked to a number of creative people that they sort of felt like they had to be pragmatic. So for me, I'm proud that I haven't let that go, as tempting as it's been, literally for decades for me. So third would be the fact that because of my belief in what I'm doing, my characters have had opportunities, USA Today, like I said earlier, Big Bang Theory. I feel like that is partially a belief in what I'm doing. So those 3 things, daughter's number one always. And, and by the way, it's been a really interesting journey as a new dad that my daughter, she sees my characters and she calls them superheroes. And the first couple of times I saw that, I got really choked up because I don't think she fully understands that dad came up with these, and then she took one of my female lead characters and said, I want to be her for Halloween. So I've definitely gotten choked up thinking about kind of being able to share that with her, so she's my actual child being intertwined with my brain children.
Now that would be, I can definitely see that being a choke up. And where can people get Black Alpha now? I mean, can they only get it at the conventions you attend, or can they message you? And
yeah, people do message me. A lot of times, occasionally I'll reshare the link to WTF Comics. By the way, WTF is not what people think it stands for. But that's part of their marketing tool, is to at least get people, get the conversation rolling, so it makes it memorable. I've actually had people say, "What the F Comics?" and I laugh my butt off. There it is. Yep, WTF Comics, and I'll share the link if you go to their website. They have a Facebook page, and they've got several books on there. Black Elf is one of them if you'd like to purchase a copy. Sometimes I've had people message me, and I will also, wanting to be on it. Oh, yeah, awesome. Like I said, there's never, it just made my heart swell 3 times the size, like the Grinch. But yeah, I mean, and so that's what we continue to do. And actually, my partnership with Jack Egan and John Jones is kind of what I needed about 2 or 3 years ago, where they also helped me get reacquainted with the notion of how awesome comics are, and focus on doing that. Because, I let people know, a lot of people don't know the behind the scenes stuff about any endeavor until you actually do it. I don't care what it is. Like, if you want to be an actor, you want to be a musician, any of that stuff, like the behind the scenes stuff is not as glamorous as what people see in the public eye. But that I think that, sorry, I was going to go off on a tangent. I totally lost my point about that. That does happen on occasion. My brain gets filled with too much information. But, I was talking about the guys at WTF Comics, is that I had to kind of get reacquainted with, between the two, it's easier to create a comic book. It's not easy. We've had some behind the scenes hiccups since the last 2 years since we did the previous Black Alpha Kickstarter. We're running a little bit behind, but at least we're still at it, right? We're still going after it. So that I had to kind of get reacquainted with the notion of trying to find the big, huge deal with a major studio. There's a lot of stumbles and a lot of, blocks in the road or bumps in the road to get there. So I'm learning to, at least initially in this first phase of moving forward with creating IP and getting it out there in the public eyes, to do the stuff that seems a little more within your reach, more reasonable. And so that's been really, I guess, fulfilling. And on a side note, by the way, because I keep forgetting to bring this up. So about a year ago, I was in discussions with a producer and a director, and they had talked about offering me a potential film role. I still have to finish my audition, I guess, almost a year later. And then I've met with a couple other people that have also talked about offering me film roles. And because of what I've had, where some of my projects have fallen apart, I've decided to kind of take the same approach of becoming a filmmaker and actor, where I sort of figure, what can I do that's doable? And at least say, this is completed content. I don't care. I have a couple of ideas. I want to do a 2 to 5 minute short film. And that's the beginning. Then it's completed content. I want to sort of show both my worth as an actor and as a director, because that's something, once again, I've wanted to do since childhood. I acted when I was younger, more specifically on plays and on stage, but I wanted to be a director as the same amount of time as I wanted to be a starship captain and a comic book artist.
I was going to say, that's the one thing I have to say as an author. I don't know if it's, I don't want to say jealous, because I know it's two different worlds, but I've always wanted to learn to write script or even panels for comic books, but it's just so different for me. There's just, the detail is completely different on how you have to describe it. And it's like being a novelist, it's more, for me, it's more detail than you do with the panels or the scripts.
Well, like I said, I'm envious of writers, period, and I wish I could write a novel. I think that would be a whole other interesting storytelling dynamic that, because the one thing I'm envious of novelists is that they do sort of they have a different connection with their audience, because like I said, the audience has to fill in the theater of the mind. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that can be a slippery slope, because the audience is filling in this information and they're developing their own mental version of the story that's unspooling as they read it. So their expectations are different, but I like the fact that the author can sort of have this, like I said, this almost like a synergistic approach again with their audience, where you're sort of creating this world together. Whereas a film or even a comic, it's already doling out the information to you visually, right? Not that I'm not lessening the other two. I'm just saying I think
Yeah.
it's a really interesting sort of alternative to how you take in content narrative.
Oh, I agree. It's such a difference, and I admire the people who can write script or the panels. It's just there's just such a difference with it. And I wish I could do both, but it's for me. It's like I got to have the detail. I just have to write that detail.
Well, and when it comes to comics, there's several approaches that can be done now. Like there's certain famous comic book writers that do write a full detailed script, breaking it down scene by scene as if they're being like a screenwriter. And that's for, I kind of prefer the Marvel way, which is what was supposedly coined during the time of Stan Lee, where he would give the writers, because he was spread so thin with the stories he was doing, that he had to give the artist loose plots, and so they were able to kind of like almost as a director fill in all these scenes, and so that to me is a little more organic, where they. But certain people, it's whatever floats your boat, really, in the end, right? I mean, everyone has to kind of go with what feels good and natural to them.
When you're working with the writers and you see the story develop, do you ever come to a point where it's like, I really don't want the story to go this way?
One of my screenwriter friends, he was doing a feature film script, a Black Alpha, and I've worked with him on a few different my characters now. And the only thing that I probably tend to go that way with him is that he tends to get a little more violent than I would like, because I'm like, I think it's unnecessary brutality, and so I've had to remind him. I want my characters to feel realistic and have some layer to them, but I don't want them to be unnecessarily brutal. And so I've had to say, yeah, let's change that scene. I don't want him killing somebody. He's not a killer, So that happened like when he was working on the feature, because he had one scene where he was trying to get information that my hero from somebody you need information from, and I think that he implied in one of his original drafts of the script that he killed that guy after he got the information. And I'm like, no, this isn't Taken with Liam Neeson. Okay, he's not that kind of a character. So
that is a big difference.
yeah.
But I can imagine that it is hard to even to not. I don't want to say confront, but I can imagine it being hard to say, nah, let's tone it down a little.
Yeah, but I also feel kind of proud of the fact that I tend to be a little less tight than probably some creators, where I'm like, if somebody gives me something that is better than what I maybe had loosely considered, I'll tend to go with that more often than not too. Like, oh, that's even better than I thought. Let's do that.
Now, are there any words of wisdom that you have for anybody that's an artist or new coming into the world or the comic scene?
Well, I'll say this first and foremost, and I know some people feel like it's a little impersonal, and I don't mean it to come across that way, but I get a lot of questions, either in person or online, and I tell people I tend to use YouTube and Google. They're my best friends, and if I have any questions about anything, you can almost literally find it on YouTube or Google at any given time. That's number one. Second of all, I would just say, give yourself some time to sort of be organic about what you're doing. If you're new, I know it can be intimidating, but at least take that first step. And I think that people realizing, like, I think the fear I would gather for some people, I've been there too, is that it's like anybody, that vulnerability you have as a creative spirit, and it's definitely a leap of faith where you're going, I'm going to attempt to share something of my innermost soul to an audience. How is it going to be received? And I understand the aversion to that, but ultimately when you do it, I don't think it's going to hurt quite as much as you think it does. And then you'll kind of learn after a while that, if you start going that path and you really feel like you're kind of being in touch with who you are and what you want to do, there's such an inner joy and inner light that comes with that. And so, I brought up Bruce Lee earlier, and I said he's been one of my biggest inspirations through most of my life. And that's another thing too. Like I told my mother this, try and find mentors, whether or not it's fictional or real life people, and look at their story to sort of at least give you a template, the direction possibly you want to go, you know. And so for me, I try and sort of now more than ever, actually, to this day, try and live the best version of myself. And that includes always being open to learning and sometimes overcoming your fears or facing your blocks, trying new things and learn from them if you stumble here and there, and just continue moving forward.
Definitely good words there. But want to thank you for being on the show, and want to thank everybody for participating on today's show. And we look forward to seeing everybody next Tuesday for our 2 for Tuesday with the conversation. But until then,